Welcome to The Thread. This is a space for fresh perspectives on Christian leadership, global culture, and evangelism in our fast-changing world. Brought to you by Alpha and hosted by me, Stephen Foster. And it's a wonderful privilege to have as our guest today, Shaila Visser. Shaila is the National Director of Alpha Canada and is the Senior Vice President of Alpha globally. And I've known Shaila for a number of years, and I'm really excited, Shaila, to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing?
Good, Stephen. It's so good to be with you. I mean, we've had the opportunity to connect in a number of different venues and places and spaces and leadership opportunities, and I really consider it a privilege to be part of this podcast.
Oh, thanks, Shaila. Shaila, tell us, how did your faith in Jesus first come alive?
Well, I was raised with a mom who took me to church, but when I went off to university, I thought there is nothing about Jesus I'm interested in here. I wanted to fit in. I didn't meet, at a university of 35,000 students, I didn't meet more than one Christian in my times at school. But That one Christian, as I was off partying, I joined a sorority. I'm based here in Canada. And at my university, I just thought, a little bit of studying, a lot of partying, a lot of hanging out with friends. That was important to me, but nothing about faith. But when I met her, I had just finished running what was then called Frosh Week or Orientation Week for 5,000 first-year students. It was the summer of my last year going into my last year of university. And I'd run it. And at the end of that week, where it's like basically teaching people how to party, a little bit about the education system, and I remember being on the hill with all 5,000 first-year students and our team that was leading it and singing and chanting and dancing, like fun, and thinking, I've never felt so alone in my life.
Wow.
And in that moment, I thought, this just doesn't bring any meaning. And I met this young woman. She was blonde and beautiful and athletic and smart and all the things I didn't know Christians could be, which sounds terrible, and just fascinating. And she loved me deeply. She really cared for me. And so she invited me to join her Bible study. I thought, why not? There's nothing to lose, maybe something to gain. And by my last semester of my last year of university, I put my full faith in Jesus. And I've never looked back. I have been committed to him ever since then. But it took that moment. I can picture it today and the feeling today of feeling like other students must look at me and think, this woman's the top of the food chain at university. She's so popular. She runs the best party at the school.
Yeah.
And I knew in my own soul, I felt the worst of the worst at that moment.
And Shaila, is that where your passion for helping people meet Jesus came from? How did that spark in you? Because you've spent a number of years like investing your life in helping people encounter Jesus. Where did that spark come from?
I remember the evening that I prayed to say, Jesus, I'm all in with you. One of the first things that came through my mind was, I wish other people knew this. And then the second thought was, I've just wasted my time at university where I have such influence and I haven't helped everybody meet Jesus. I thought that was kind of strange that lots of people who come to faith feel loved, feel forgiven. There's all sorts of things. But my first feelings were purpose and longing for others to know this and wishing I'd used all my university time to help them.
Wow. And how did you discern what to do next? Because obviously lots of amazing people who become Christians go into the business sphere or go into law or go into running their own companies. But you felt a calling right from the off to kind of step into ministry. How did that begin for you?
Well, I really thought I went from university to living in Toronto and working for marketing firms. So I thought my expression of faith in helping people meet Jesus would be by having a job in the workplace where I could help people come to know Jesus. And while I was there, I realized how many people in senior positions were miserable. Not everyone, but many. And I thought, what is going on? Why am I on this track to become successful in the business world? if it just leads to a place where they're unhappy. And I think God used that. I don't think everybody who's in the workplace is unhappy or deeply dissatisfied.
Yeah.
But I think God allowed me to see a number of people that were to cast my eyes in a different direction for meaning and purpose. And I heard about an organization called Women in Leadership. It was part of a larger Christian organization, and they were helping women in the workplace meet Jesus. And so I went all in with them. I moved to the west coast of Canada, Vancouver, where I've been for the last 29 years. And I started just working for them, trying to help women in downtown Vancouver explore faith. And it was fascinating. And I was only 23 at the time. And I'm telling you, I had the privilege of leading many people to the Lord because I wasn't threatening. I was just too young and naive to be a threat to their professional career. And so I just got to help people meet Jesus.
Wow. Well, and what if there's someone listening and they're at a similar kind of crossroads, or they're trying to work out what to do with their life? What would your top tips be on calling?
Well, I just want to say that in calling, I don't think for most people, their heart and their head align. And so, what I mean by that is lots of people want the feelings to say, I feel this, therefore I'm going to do it. And sometimes that happens. But in every single case where God has asked me to make a significant move, whether it was in this first Women in Leadership or coming to work at Alpha, I would think, I don't want to do that. Please don't make me do that. And every single time I did it out of obedience and faithfulness to the voice of God, not because my heart wanted to. I thought it was ridiculous. I come from a immigrant family from India who it's like work hard, earn money, make your way in the world. And here I was raising money, asking people to help. I was like, that is the stupidest way to do this. Lord, please don't make me do it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how he can sort of push you in a direction with love and kindness, but clarity.
Yeah.
And finally, I felt I have to surrender to it. I don't have a choice if I want to live a purpose-filled life. And then my feelings followed. So it was really interesting. Every single time God's done a significant call, it's followed that. I feel the sense of God's leading. I don't want to do it. I say no 10 times, maybe 110 times. And then finally I surrender. And then within a few weeks of surrendering to it, all the feelings of joy around it come.
It's so interesting. So it's almost like your emotions take a while to catch up with your obedience, but obedience has to come first.
Every single time.
So if someone's taken the decision of obedience and they're still waiting for the emotions to catch up, then there's hope. There's hope. Yeah.
I remember when I was appointed as the national director of Alpha Canada, and I had not done it willingly. I'd been convinced that it was a good idea by both God and some convincing board members in Alpha. But I still was like, I can't believe the Lord's asking me to do this. And my first thought was, I don't even love the staff. And I thought, how can you lead people you don't love? And then the Lord said, ask me to change your heart. And for the few weeks before I even started, the Lord changed my heart completely. And I've never had a staff member that I don't love. And it's a gift from the Spirit to love the people you lead.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And Shaila, I hope you don't mind me saying, but I've met lots of leaders around the world. You are one of the most remarkable leaders I've met globally. Your resilience, your drive, you've got real steel, you get things done, but you're deeply pastoral, empathetic, and so many gifts. How have you, on that journey, leading in Alpha Canada, how have you grown in your leadership, and what are the things you've learned, the key things you've learned along the way?
Well, a couple things. One, as the breadth of my influence has grown, I've realized that the depth has to be greater. And that means intimacy with Jesus, understanding full surrender to the Spirit and what he wants to do, a longing to align with what the Father's doing in the world. I think a longing not to do busy work, but to do fruitful work, which means much more attention to the Spirit versus just like, what is the Harvard Business Review saying is some good business principles that I should follow. I mean, I read all of that. Like, don't get me wrong, I love that. But more than that, it's the deep intimacy with the Trinity that leads to a fruitful life, not a busy life. And I have both a busy life and fruitful, but I want to ensure that it's not just busy for busy's sake,
Mm.
to look good to man, but actually, what does fruitful life look like? And so that requires me to be very disciplined in my morning. It means to be disciplined in how I approach my work with my colleagues, etc. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I think, as I've been in a leadership position of some sort for over, I think it's now going on 25 years, I've been in some sort of leadership position.
Yeah.
I will say that I have realized the longer I'm in leadership, the less I know.
Mm.
And the less you know, the more you need to learn.
Mm.
And so I find myself more hungry for learning now, more open to coaching, mentoring other experts than I've ever been, because I realize that there's so much more to learn to make an impact in this world. So many more ways that I can change my approaches, especially as we lead Gen Z, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha. I need to change my approach. I need to watch for them and look for them and learn from them. And so I think leadership is a learning journey. And if you stopped learning, you're really putting a ceiling on your leadership capabilities.
It's so interesting, Shaila. It almost feels like there's two prongs to that. One is sharpening your skill set, so kind of sharpening the saw, sharpening your skill set, but then also deepening your surrender in a way. And I feel like when I look at the way you lead in different contexts, I think there's someone who's got very high skills, but also a real desire to live a surrendered life. And I think that's probably quite a powerful combination.
I've really spent a lot of time in the Psalms. Psalms has formed me over the last, I'd say, 4 years. I journal a psalm a day. And I thought I'd share this psalm from Psalm 37. It really spoke to me. When I got to Psalm 37, the very first time I was doing a psalm a day, I stayed there for 10 days. And every time I get there, I stay there for another few days when
Really?
I revolve around back to it. And the reason is in the ESV, it says, fret not. And as a leader, I don't think I'm a worried person. I don't think I'm a fearful person. But as soon as the psalmist wrote fret not, I was like, shoot, nailed me. I fret. Fear, worry, no. Fret, yes. But it says fret not yourself a number of times in that psalm. But in the first 7 verses, it talks about trusting in the Lord and doing good, dwelling in the land of befriending faithfulness, delighting ourselves in the Lord. And then it says in verse 4, and he will give you the desires of your heart, which actually in the real translation, the original, it says, he is shaping the desires of my heart. So when I'm actually trusting and dwelling and delighting, he's shaping the desires of my heart. And then I commit them to the Lord. I trust in him. And this is the killer line for me, who's an Enneagram 3 activist. He will act. He will act. There is so much work to be done to serve God and his church in the world. We can do it out of just work, or we can dwell and delight and let him shape our hearts, and then he acts and we join him. That's the kind of ministry life, work life that I want.
Yeah, I love that, Shaila. I love that. And you talked about leading Gen Z, Gen Alpha. And one of the things I really admire about you is that you have helped the whole kind of Alpha organization really keep focused on the rising generation on the one hand. But also you have raised up yourself at the same time a number of amazing young leaders. And you've kind of provided a covering for them. You've given them space to grow. And I'm sure there'll be lots of leaders, kind of established leaders listening to this, but also lots of young leaders. And what are the kind of top things you've learned about how to raise up young leaders? And what does that look like for you?
Well, I'll say a couple of things. One is, do you really love them? Are you curious about the way they think and process and approach problem solving? Because rather than thinking, I don't like that, it's different than I do it, I get curious. Like, why do you see it that way? Why would you approach the problem that way? How are you going to solve it? And then I give them freedom to do it. And the guardrails for me with younger leaders are clear outcomes and clear values. If they have clear values, of course, they have a budget of some sort, and I trust them to run within the budget. If they understand the values and they know the outcomes, my job is to get out in front and to remove any rock off their path. Because I fundamentally believe that young people have the solutions to the problems their generation is facing much more than I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I want to use my influence, my ability to, whether it's raise funds or open doors for them, I want to do that so they can run further and faster than I did for the sake of the work that God's called them to do. I really fundamentally believe that's my job. And so my goal is how many more leaders can I participate in helping them in their leadership journey so they can have a greater impact. And my hope is that so many of them, 50 or more, would have a greater impact than I will ever see in my lifetime.
Yeah, that's inspiring. And you've really done it, Shaila, because I think when I think back to obviously raising up Jason and Ben and people like Steve Mulder and other people, you've actually cleared the path for people to really take risks and try new things. And what are some of the challenges you faced along the way, or some of the costs that you've incurred? Because I think everyone would agree with the sentiment, but we know that in reality, you have to be willing to take the hit sometimes, and sometimes clearing rocks out the way means you might stub your toe on a rock or get taken out by a rock, and sometimes it's not always as straightforward as that. So, what's the costs you've been willing to incur in order, almost what the price you've been willing to pay to raise up those amazing young leaders?
I think the cost that I have and will pay is reputation. Is what is my reputation? Let's say a large donor invests in a particular strategy that I'm actually giving authority to a young leader, and it doesn't go as well as we thought. I don't have the benefit, or I should never take the benefit of blaming someone else. I'm the leader. I chose who's leading it. So I have to take the hit or the reputational loss with a donor whose project didn't go as well as we thought. Or maybe it did go well, but not in the way we originally anticipated. So I would say in the charitable sector, we have to think about donor stakeholders. And if we're entrusting a young person to lead, how are we standing in the gap for that young leader to both help them succeed, but also if things don't go as well as we want, stand with the person who invested in it and take responsibility. So that's one way.
So that's like that's like a freedom to fail. So you're almost giving space for the young leader not to bear the cost of their failure, but or that not to bear all the costs of things not working out the way they'd have hoped. Or
Oh, that's right. That would be terrible.
yeah, yeah,
People
yeah.
did it for me, Stephen. They protected me from the consequences of some of my maybe ignorant decisions or inexperience. They protected me and allowed me to try new things. And I suspect most of the time I had no idea they were doing it. I can only reflect now on it and say, I know what they did because there's no way that should have happened.
Yeah.
And so I can now see how that benefited me, and I want it to benefit others. And I want to challenge them. I really think, and I've heard you talk about it too, the bar needs to be set very high for them to say, you can do it. We believe in you. So I think I have a greater belief in most of the young leaders in Alpha than they have in themselves when they first come to work for us. Because I think God's given me both a gift to see young people and see all of that raw talent and what it could be when it's worked out alongside of them. So I think in that, sometimes I also take, I wouldn't say hits, but questions from, let's say, other Alpha staff that are on our executive team or leadership team, when I champion one or two of them with raw talent that perhaps others aren't able to see as quickly as I can. And so sometimes it's an internal hit, sometimes it's external, but I have never regretted it. Ever. Not one time have I thought, I wish I wouldn't have done that. And sometimes it's painful. Sometimes you have to ask other people, I've made this decision and this young leader is doing this, and what should I do? And so I have also recognized the need for other leaders that are ahead of me to coach me in how to lead young leaders well. And I've learned a lot from them. But I think the hits are worth it every time, Stephen. I cannot encourage a leader to say, betting on young leaders is worth it 100% of the time, even when they don't succeed. You have done all you can to give them every opportunity to do so.
So freedom to fail. And then you were going to say a second one, Shaila. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, I think the freedom to fail, but also I think we are responsible for helping them see their potential. whether it's using a personality test and how do you function,
Yeah.
or whether it's like, here's something new, try it, or whether it's like, come alongside with me as I go and do this and be part of it. I just invited one of our young staff to come to a quite a senior meeting with me with an external partner. And it was a 2-day offsite. And I said, listen, you're taking notes and getting coffee if we need it to help, but it's getting you in the room. You're the helper in the room. But there's times I'm going to invite you to contribute. And he was a 10 out of 10 star in the room. But what he got to observe and learn was, how do you run at leadership at that high a level? And what do I learn from it? So it's also, it's not just failure, freedom to fail, but it's also invitation into rooms your position doesn't get you into naturally.
Yeah.
We have to bring them along, give them clear expectations of their role in that room, but let them observe. And then a week later, he and I had a our follow-up call where he got to say, why did you say this? How did you do this? What did you think of this dynamic? And then we had a debrief. And so again, it's opening up spaces for them to come and observe and learn with follow-up afterwards.
So good. It's so good. And just talking about that, Shaila, what one of the things that you've done is you've been able to innovate in all sorts of different ways in your leadership. But I feel you've also been able to create a culture where innovation is kind of encouraged, fostered, and how have you done that?
Well, I think fundamentally, it's the why that drives me. I want the world to know Jesus. So everything about innovation is driven by that why. I don't have all the answers. I don't think any one of us has all the answers, but there's a lot of answers and a lot of solutions to the problems in people around me. And so we have something that we call hypotheses testing. It's like the entrepreneurial mindset of build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. You're always building something, you're measuring its success, you're learning from it and redoing it. Either it's completely new, you've trashed it because it wasn't very good, or you're refining it all the time. And those can be small projects that last 1 week, or they could be a project that lasts 2 years.
Yeah.
But you're always building, measuring, and learning. So throughout Alpha in Canada, there's a conversation always about, what are you hypotheses testing? And we will put good money into hypotheses testing because we know to get breakthrough, you have to risk to find new avenues of reach to people who aren't yet Christians. And to do that, you just need to spend some money, you need to risk your reputation, and you need to continue to hypotheses test. And so we've always got many going on at one time. But the innovation side is really driven by our why. And if you don't have your clear why, innovation then can become its own thing for its own sake. And it really then confuses everyone that works at the organization. And they think we're just a little spastic. You try this, you try that. But we're target locked on our why. So hypotheses learning towards the why always then helps us grow.
So good. And Shaila, just in terms of helping people see the importance of going down in age and focusing on the rising generation, I watched a talk you gave at I think it's the National Prayer Breakfast. You were the keynote speaker, and there's like the Prime Minister of Canada, all these kind of politicians. And at the start of your talk, you said, if you've got a child, you know, if you someone you really care about, a young person you really care about, someone who your friend has that you care about, when you stand, and you got all these kind of politicians to stand, and you just say, that's the people in this room who really care about the rising generation. And so what are we going to do to reach the people that you care about? And it's such a kind of powerful moment of helping this group of kind of leaders and politicians and dignitaries kind of focus on those who aren't in the room. And so what drives you in that area?
Well, a couple things I'll say. First of all, the reason I approach the talk that way is you're in a room where there's politicians who, don't like each other. They sit on different sides of the house. They have lots of reasons to disagree. And what I wanted to remind them is we have a very large reason to agree and to unify to solve problems. And one of them is what can we do to solve the problem of loneliness and mental health and provide the children and the young people of our nation a future that is worth living for and exciting, where they can have impact. And so I really wanted to align the room around something we agree on, not all the things we disagree on.
Yes.
And so that's why I continually talk about the opportunities for our younger demographic. And recently, the Lord has given us a vision in Canada to say, what would it look like for every school, high school, so that's 14 to 18-year-olds that are in like high school in Canada. What would it look like for every school to have prayer for it from September till June, which is our school year,
Yeah.
for 4,911 high schools in our country? And we're launching it this year. And our goal is that if everyone's hearts are turned towards the next generation, that the Spirit will move in our country. And so that's one of our fundamental drivers is praying for the schools will change our nations. So
Wow.
that's what we're dreaming about. We're about to launch it in the spring and really trusting God because we do think it's what will unify us is seeing the issues that young people are facing and how we, if we work together, can solve those problems and give them freedom to believe they have the ability to solve the problems.
That's an amazing initiative, Shaila. Wow. And so people praying for schools right around the country and dedicating themselves to pray for
Well,
those
I'll tell
schools.
you how it came about because you'll probably laugh. You know me enough to know that this is true of me. I have a bit of a heavy foot when I drive, and I like to drive quickly. And in Canada, in the school zones, you have to drive, when it's a school day, you have to drive 30 kilometers an hour, not 50 kilometers an hour.
Wow.
And when the children are in their school, you think, why do I have to slow down? There's no child at risk, right? And so I drive quite quickly if I don't see kids. And one day I felt the Holy Spirit whisper to me, slow down. And I thought, well, isn't that kind? The Lord's telling me to slow down because there must be a police officer up ahead. And and then I get to the other side of the school zone, there's no police officer. And so literally I say to the Lord, well, why did you tell me
Yeah.
to slow down? And he said to me, Shayla, when you slow down, you notice.
Mm.
And when you notice, you pray. And so I started for about a year. Every single school zone I'd pray, either I'd pray for it, whether I was walking by it or driving by it. I
Mm.
would pray. I'd be with some other place in the country with a staff member who lives in that part of the country, and they'd feel me hit them quickly when we were driving to say, "Hey, we're passing a school. Let's pray for that school by name."
Wow.
And I think that the Lord used my speeding in school zones and the kindness of God to use something funny
Yeah.
to actually profoundly change my heart towards prayer for schools, leading to Alpha Canada having this prayer initiative for 4,911 high schools.
It's extraordinary, Shayla. That's amazing. And I think that's one of the things that I found very moving about your talk at the National Prayer Breakfast was when you asked people to stand if they had children, or you actually said, my husband and I, we haven't been able to have children, and which must have really connected with a number of people in the room for whom, for various reasons, that would be their story too, and then but you didn't dwell on it. You said, but I am blessed with 11 godchildren. And I think you said that it had recently been Mother's Day, and you'd got, I can't remember, it was 5 texts from your godchildren. I don't know about the other 6, but 5 of them had remembered.
2 of them are too young to have a phone.
But 5 of them had sent you a text saying, happy. And I mean, do you mind saying a little bit about that and that part of your story? Because it felt you kind of dealt with it in a very powerful way, but it felt quite significant.
I didn't realize how important it would be for other people to see a leader who could talk about their vulnerabilities, their disappointments, their frustrations in the public sphere.
Mm.
And to name in a room publicly, I haven't been able to have children, but I have 11 godchildren, felt somewhat redemptive for me,
Mm.
healing, to be able to say, because you go to any conversation and one of the first, what do you do? And do you have a family?
Yeah.
And I always say, yes, I'm married, but the next question is, do you have children? So it's not a question that comes infrequently. It comes every time you're in a place meeting new people.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I say on a very regular basis, no, I haven't been able to have children. And so being able to say in a room of, I don't know, 1,900 people, I don't have children, but I've been blessed with godchildren felt redemptive for me. But also, I, I sensed that I was standing as a model for others that had never been married, perhaps had never been able to have children. And it's a painful journey.
Yeah.
but that they could see in someone, God can use it. And I actually am at a point where I'm like, thank you, Jesus, that I didn't have children, which sounds very odd. But the reason I say that is because I get to do the kind of work I'm doing now because I've had freedom of travel, a freedom of time that I wouldn't have had. And both Ryan and I look and say, look at the richness of our life with so many young people. We get to be the cool auntie and uncle. I think we don't age because, we don't have children. We still feel like we're in our 30s. But we get to be the cheerleader, the supporter, the one that doesn't have to discipline. We get to spoil and love and listen and be curious in a way that allows them to have other adults in their lives who believe in them. I was raised with my parents' best friends who thought I could walk on water. I really believe to this day they think I can walk on water. And the gift was in my home when it wasn't easy as a teenager. I had other adults that believed in me. And so Ryan and I get to be that for a whole host of people, and we love it. And it is redemptive, and it is good, and it is purpose filled. And so I no longer feel the terrible pain of not having children. I once in a while feel a twinge when I hold a newborn, just because they're so beautiful and they're such a gift. But most of the time, I'm just delighted for whoever has a family. And I think God's given me a different path, and I get to have a lot of godchildren.
Wow. So it's just such a powerful perspective, Shaila. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, kind of connected to that is the whole area of suffering, and as a leader, how you kind of steward suffering or more challenging times. And we've talked before about, you had a major, not long, I think, after you took on the Alpha Canada job, I'm trying to remember, you had a quite significant health condition. Maybe a year after you took on Alpha Canada. And talk a little bit about that and the impact that had on you.
Well, can I say a little bit more than that, which I've
Yeah.
started to talk about for the very first time publicly in the
Yeah.
last year? Because I find it amazing that God can use us regardless of our broken places. And so I have childhood trauma as part of my story, and I haven't been really able or willing to talk about it for a long time. And I've just been willing to say it out loud because I think it helps other people to know I understand.
Yeah.
So you think of childhood trauma, and then at the age of 37, my best friend, who was the young woman in university who helped me meet Jesus, died of breast cancer, leaving behind her 5-year-old and 7-year-old and a distraught husband. And a year and a half later, I've started running Alpha Canada, and I get my own life-threatening illness. And thinking, Lord, like we've been through so much. And, on Good Friday, my pastor came in, and he said it was the first time in his whole pastoral career that he'd said with confidence, the Lord is going to heal you. And I had something called Cryptococcus gattii. It's also known as fungal meningitis, where you have a replicating ball of fungus on your brain, which is life-threatening. 25% of those who get it die from it quite quickly. And those that survive it often never go back to work full time because the drugs are as bad as the disease. The fact that I have gone back to work full time is just a miracle of Jesus. There is no fungal ball, there's no scar, which you should have for life. It was a true miracle. And so I've had that. My husband's a police officer, he's been through PTSD. We've had our fair share of suffering. But here's the beauty in it all. The Lord, first of all, meets you through community and through his spirit comforting. But then he can build the beauty out of ashes. And in the midst of the suffering, he could still use you. We just had our student leader collective this past weekend, 80 14-year-olds in the room. And I told a little bit of my story with a bit more vulnerability. And I wanted them to know that whatever they're facing, there's still purpose and hope. And that even in the midst of the darkness and the ugliness, you can still be used by God. And I pointed to times God had done it for me. And I often feel that when I've needed healing, if I could relate to a biblical character, it was the woman who was bleeding, who went to Jesus in a crowd and just wanted to reach out and grab the hem of his robe. And I often feel that those who have suffered, they don't want to come face to face with Jesus. It just feels a little too much. They just want to kind of run through the crowd and if I can just touch his robe. And so I said to these 14-year-olds, if that's all you can do, it's good enough.
Yeah.
And Jesus can heal, and Jesus can bring light into your darkness. And in the midst of it, he can still use you. In all of my traumas, in all of my journey, I see fruitfulness as I look back on those dark times. And I think, isn't the Lord amazing? In the brightness of the day, I can look back and say, he used me, even when I was the most desperate.
Yeah, yeah. That's such a powerful image, Shaila. Yeah. And just say a bit about what you're seeing. You talked about the 14-year-olds, but also what you're seeing in terms of the research and Alpha Canada often commissioning research amongst the rising generation and, the open generation. How are those themes of kind of suffering, vulnerability, being authentic as a leader? How are they feeding into how you're trying to kind of meet the kind of rising generation?
Well, I'll say that all the research in Canada and globally, particularly in the West, as you well know, is speaking towards this younger generation being the most open spiritually. And Bible sales up in the UK, in Canada, in the US. We know that the number of people by demographic going to church, the highest amount, 12% of Canadians might go to church in any given week. But if you look at the under 30 generation, it goes up to 18%. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so we know the spirit is moving. We know young people in Canada are very secular. 45% of young Gen Z have neither a positive or negative view of Jesus. They literally have no idea. And a teacher friend of mine who teaches 12-year-old boys said that she was in the classroom and one boy, little Filipino boy, said to the other boy, "Did you know Jesus is king?" And the other little boy said, "King of which country?" So there's just this lack of knowledge. And in that lack of knowledge, you get this sort of blank slate of people who are curious that they can be invited to Alpha, be invited to church, be invited to youth, because they're like, okay, is this where you find hope? Is this where I can find peace? Is this where I find purpose? Is this where I find leaders that believe in me and will love me and champion me and come alongside of me and support me and pray for me? Yes, that is the church. At its best, that is the church. And so I just look, and God just continues to say, Shaila, look younger, look younger, look younger. And so we've been thinking about what can we do at Alpha in Canada to play our part in reaching 4.4 million teenagers with the good news of Jesus. And that's our bullseye right now. 4.4 million. What are we doing with other charities, with the church across the nation? We're building a student leader collective. We've started with 80 students and 40 mentors. They're about to run Alpha in their high schools. It's a 6-month program, but we're going to build it to 3,000. Because we think if we can have 3,000 14-year-olds a year, knowing that someone believes in them, working with their adult mentors, we can actually see transformation in our nation of an entire generation that are living with purpose and believe they have a voice. And when we did this little exercise, perhaps you've heard of Dragon's Den. It's, when
Yes.
people come and pitch their business. We did Lion's Den with these 14-year-olds. They had an hour and a half in the afternoon to work on it. And then in the evening, they pitched before the investors. And they had 100 good ideas, I think, but 13 of them came forward. And of these 13, the most extraordinary, I'm just looking for the photo of the young woman who was part of a team. Again, remember, 14-year-olds.
Yeah.
They pitched a program called Foster the Future. They give us the data on foster children in the system. And they said if every church had one family in our province that would foster one child, and the whole church community knew that this family is fostering them and came around them to support them with prayer, finances, love, extra help, that every church could cover every foster child in a province.
Wow.
14-year-olds. And they called it Foster the Future. And I said to them, this needs to exist in the world and you can do it. How can we help? And so we brainstormed with them ways we could help. So I really believe fundamentally, Stephen, that our job is to notice, to give them courage and faith that they can do it. Jesus picked such young disciples. I mean, he trusted the future of the Christian message to 12 under 30s. Like, I'm like, would we do that in the church today? I don't think so. But Jesus does it. And I'm very challenged by that to say, okay, Shaila, if Jesus did it, go out and spot the young ones. Let them know you believe in them, help them, remove rocks on their path, and really give them courage to believe they could transform a nation. And one young guy at the end of this weekend, Nathan, he stood up and he said, he didn't know any of this, that was not my passion. He said, guys, this room can change our country. And tears just rolled down my cheek. And I said, yes, yes, that's right.
That's amazing. That's amazing, Shaila. Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Isn't that blank slate with the rising generation? So much openness to faith and a blank slate in terms of Jesus. And we have this amazing opportunity to hold out Jesus to the rising generation.
It's incredible. I wish everyone could see it, Stephen. You and I have the awesome privilege of seeing it, but I want to say to every church leader, every adult, every grandparent, don't miss it. Don't miss what the Lord's doing. It's so, so fun, and it's amazing, and it's a privilege to be part of it.
And you've talked about just the power of coming alongside and cheering on the rising generation. I just wonder if there was a 25-year-old who's listening to this, and a 25-year-old listening to this, they're thinking, what would your word of encouragement be to them?
I think I would say you can do it. The problems you see in the world, the Spirit of the living God lives in you. And he has a purpose for you. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be grand and people will notice. It could be just loving a neighbor, loving your younger sibling's friend who's struggling. There's so many ways we get to make a difference. Some get notoriety and some get none. But it doesn't mean you aren't being faithful and obedient. Faithfulness can look very small in the eyes of the world, but in the kingdom, it's massive. And it impacts one. So don't think, you've got to start a new charity. If God's leading you to do that, go do it. But it can also be, I noticed that my younger brother's friend is really struggling. Maybe I can take them for a coffee. And then remember, if you're 25, you're older now. You have a whole generation behind you that you get to champion and love and encourage. So get all the leadership development you can, but remember you have a role to play in the generation behind you, and don't miss out.
Amazing. Amazing. Shaila, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all your wisdom, so much kind of gold, and really exciting. It's a real privilege to have you with us. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. It was great to be with you today. God bless.
And thanks so much for joining us on The Thread. And it's been wonderful to have you with us listening. And we look forward to hearing you and seeing you next time. The Thread podcast is brought to you by Alpha, the home of curiosity, conversations, and exploring the Christian faith together. If you know someone who's curious about faith, Alpha might just be the space for them. Why not visit alpha.org or follow us on Instagram and share an invite to a course near you.